afternoon, everybody. Selamat siang dan selamat datang Bapak dan Ibu. Semoga selalu sehat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're well. Welcome to the second version or the second webinar in the Talent Accelerator program. I'm very excited that today we get to talk about the topic, what is the need for research? After we spoke about what is impactful research in our very first webinar. And of course, we'll have a third webinar on this topic in July, which is around how do the researchers actually plan to create impact. So we're bringing three different topics together in this series of webinars. Before we get started today, I would like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations, on whose land I am presenting from today. And I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Also, before we start, I would really like to thank you for the feedback that you have provided after our first webinar. The Talent Accelerator program is a rapidly developing platform, and your feedback is therefore very important to us. And we have taken note of your feedback, and we have already tried to implement some of the changes in our webinar today. So, for example, based on your suggestions, we have extended the duration of the webinar from 60 to 90 minutes. Also, we have included more Q&A. Last time we had quite a long introduction and presentations from our panelists. Today, we're going to focus more on Q&A and hear more from you. Also, we have shifted towards introduction videos that we now post before the webinar, and I'd like to thank our panelists today for working with us in producing these videos and generously making them available beforehand. Because the turnaround time between previous webinar and this one was relatively short, we did not manage to get all the videos to you a week in advance, so you have a lot of time to prepare them, but I hope that you can see this as a very first step in us trying to make this really rich information and knowledge available to you. And I also hope that you have enjoyed the materials that our panelists have made available to you today. Also, we are working towards better ways to connect you as a group. So in that sense, we are also looking for more feedback on your behalf on how can we connect you better. I realize that we have people from 11 different universities participating in the Talent Accelerator program from a variety of different disciplines across 2 countries, and that you might be very interested to get to know each other a little bit better. And one way of doing that is through the introduction exercise on the open learning platform, but we are very much looking to create more opportunities. So one of the things that we are thinking about is opening up this room before or after the webinar next time, so that you have an opportunity to engage with each other. But please, in your feedback, provide us with other ideas that you have on things that you would like to see and how you would like to connect with other people in the program. So let's move on to the topic of today, the demand for impactful research. And we know that there are many challenges and problems out there, and for which many of them our solutions are known. But not always do these solutions reach the people that are affected by these issues or challenges, or it takes a long time for that knowledge to get through to them. So I guess the question for this webinar is, how is research actually linked to those daily or practical problems, and what are some of the knowledge institutions, some of the parties and people involved in getting your research to, for example, to policy or to practical solutions that people all around the world can benefit from, but particularly in the context of Australia-Indonesian relationships and some of the challenges that we are facing there. So today we have an excellent panel that I'm very proud to present to you. They approach the topic of the demand for impact from different angles. We have Jana Hertz, who is the team leader of the Knowledge Sector Initiative, and she has a big overview of kind of all these parties that are involved in getting knowledge from A to B, from you as a knowledge producer to to policy and to people who are going to make use of that knowledge. So she can provide an overview together with her colleagues about the landscape of the knowledge sector between Australia and Indonesia. Also then from a government point of view, we have Professor Nunung Nuryatono, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Economics and Management at IPB University and a member of the Supervisory Board of the Bank of Indonesia. Next to that, he also sits on the National Research Council and advises the Ministry of National Development and Planning, Bappenas, in their strategies on how to engage research into policy. And he also contributes to as a national curator for the UN Food Systems Summit Dialogues, and is the chair of and in the past was the chair of the Presidential Advisory Council. So from this very rich experience, Professor Nunung will talk to us about what he has learned about how government engages with research to develop policy-driven, evidence-based policy. And lastly, on the panel today, I would like to welcome Bethany Davies. She works for ACR and she manages the portfolio of planning and impact evaluation, which I think the perspective that she brings to our webinar today is nicely complementary to the other two, because she takes it sort of to a level that is slightly smaller. She is working for one of the important players in this knowledge network between Australia and Indonesia. And she speaks from a center point of view in what do they look for in their portfolio of activities, how do they engage with researchers, and how do they think about impact and the need for impact in the Australian-Indonesian space. The format of our webinar today is mostly going to be question and answers. So get your pens ready. Please send your questions through in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and that will be a good way to engage with the panel today. Before we go into the Q&A, I will ask the panelists to each provide a brief introduction to themselves and tell a little bit more about the work that they do and what insights they can bring on the topic today. So welcome to you, everybody. I'm excited to have you back on board. Welcome to our panelists, and let's get started. Can I start with Jana? Welcome, and can I ask you to introduce yourself and your colleagues who are here with you today?
Great. Well, thank you. We're delighted to be a part of this very important Para-Talent Accelerator program. My name is Jana Hertz, and I'm the team leader of the Knowledge Sector Initiative. And I'll let my colleagues, Ibu Pinkan and Ibu Prima, introduce themselves in just a moment. Before I do, I just wanted to say that the Knowledge Sector Initiative is a partnership between the governments of Australia and Indonesia. It's funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Australia and implemented in cooperation with the National Development Planning Agency of Indonesia, or Bappenas. It's a program, it's the largest evidence-based policy program in the world, and it's focused on promoting evidence-based policymaking in Indonesia. And so in the video that we prepared, we talked a bit about the knowledge ecosystem model that we use that Martin referenced in the introduction, which talks about the production of knowledge by think tanks and research institutes, the use of knowledge by government policymakers, parliamentarians, knowledge intermediaries like the media and civil society organizations, and knowledge enablers, those that set the policies and the regulations for a healthy ecosystem to promote evidence-based policymaking. So KSI, or the Knowledge Sector Initiative, works on promoting each of those important elements in the knowledge ecosystem, as well as the interaction between them. And in the video, we provide some examples of how that has worked in our experience in Indonesia through our program. And we also provided some tips for early career researchers, in particular, engage policymakers from the design stage of the research and think about the policy objectives as you design the research, and also to be really proactive about sharing the results of your research. We find that often researchers are hesitant to share their results because they're concerned about objectivity, but we see it as an issue of if you've spent a lot of time doing your research, you want to make sure that as many people as possible know about it. So that's a little bit about what our program is trying to promote. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Bu Pikan and Bu Prima to introduce themselves and their role in the program and anything they would like to add. Silakan Bu Prima and dan Bu Pikan.
Okay, I think I'll start first then. Thank you. Thank you, Bujana. My name is Primantia Romana Wulandari. I'm the program lead for Knowledge Exchange and Learning. And basically what we are doing is surrounding in public discourse is surrounding the concept of broadening policy horizons, as you see in the video, that we are introducing new ideas to the policy agenda, ensuring the information comes to policymakers in ways they can use it, and fostering the dialogue between researchers and policymakers, as well as enhancing horizontal dialogue across the community of policymakers. Because we believe that this actually helped the stage for changing the policy regimes over time. And basically, what we are doing in the Knowledge Exchange and Learning program is, like what usually common advice for policy analysts and researchers, where as a lessons learned, we also know that communicating research meaning keep it concise, tailor it to your audience, make evidence policy relevant, give advice, but don't sit on the fence. However, we also learned that unless researchers are prepared to act quickly, to gather data efficiently, and then to meet a tight brief for policymakers, they're not really in the impact business or policy influence sphere described by most policy analysis texts as we describe it in or elaborated in the video before. I think that's from my side. Happy to discuss further about what we are doing in the public discourse and communicating research. Over to you, Ibu Pinkan. Thanks.
Thank you, Ibu Prima, and welcome in the session today. Ibu Pinkan, welcome.
You. Yeah, hi. So I'm Pinkan Umboh. I'm program lead in strategic partnership management of the Knowledge Sector Initiative. My role is about partnering with 16 prominent think tanks in Indonesia and working with them in ensuring quality of policy research and getting their research recommendation into influencing policies. We see think tanks as important actors in this knowledge ecosystem as they produce the knowledge and they also have the links and paths to influence and bring their knowledge into influencing policies. So together, we build strategic program logic prior them developing research design. We also develop monitoring and evaluation framework. So together we can track their research and ensure the relevance, usefulness, and timeliness of their research with the policy issues. So that's what we did. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Pinkan, and welcome to the session. Next, can I ask Professor Nunung to introduce yourself a bit further? Welcome, Prof. Nunung.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for colleagues in Australia. As what Martin just introduced me, it's a great honor for me to join in this very important webinar, which is all participants. I believe that this is all will be the next researcher generation in Indonesia as well as in Australia. Yeah, I'm as a dean at the Faculty of Economic and Management, IBB University, and as also just what Martin mentioning, I also touched in Bapenas as a panel for special task force to review the food estate policy in Indonesia. And currently, I just appointed as the member or the curator, national curator for Food Summit System Dialogue that will be held in New York, October. Yeah, I was so very fortunate when I get an opportunity to be a secretary of chair from at the Presidential Advisory Board at the Presidential Office. When I was there for almost 2 years before I returned back to university, I thought that how we can effectively inform the government based on the policy research. So the important thing is that the government institution will not have enough time to read what we are doing and then what we are published in the international journal. So again, I really thought that at that time that when we can produce very short or like a policy brief to the government, then the government read what the important things based on our research. This is then when I returned back to the university, I realized that university can have an important play role to produce the important advice to the government based on our research. Back to the previous years when I did a research on how the important aspect to be considered to the government when it was an outbreak of avian influenza. At that time, government focused on the important role of men. But then based on our research, women are the important part of the important role to mitigate the risk of avian influenza. Why? Because the women almost every day get in touch rising chicken, things like that. But then when the government socialize, when the government trying to get in touch to reduce and mitigate the avian influenza, the targeted is men. But then based on our research, we inform to the government that women is the important one. This is the case that we have really to look on the ground based on our research and then translate into the policy, then submit to the government. When I was in the presidential office, you can imagine the presidential and the cabinet just did 1 or 2 pages of very concise information. And this was really based on our research. So that's why the important evidence-based policy research that we conduct together then can be translated into a government policy format. This is one of the important examples. Another example I would like to also give to you, once I'm as a national curator for Food System Summit Dialogue, we need also how to translate our research into important keyword, like for example, how food system to be resilient, how food system to be sustained in the next future. It is impossible without any research as a background to determine resilience, to determine sustainable, to determine adaptive. Based on different methodology, then we come into important keyword become a game changer for sustainable, for resilience, things like that. So again, I would very happy to share my experience as a researcher, as a dean, as well as a different duty at the national level as well as in international level.
Thank you very much, Prof. Nunung. It's a pleasure to have you here today, and I can't wait to hear more about your experience in making a relevant policy out of research. Can I welcome our last guest on the panel today, Bethany Davies from ACR. Bethany, could you please introduce yourself and a bit more about the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with you this afternoon and to be presenting alongside such experienced colleagues. So I work with the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, which is the agricultural research for development arm of the Australian aid program. So I guess 40 years ago now, there was the ACR was established, I guess, recognizing the really foundational role that science plays in assisting countries and communities realize their human development aspirations and goals. So I would applaud the foresightedness of our colleagues who established the agency all those years ago. And we've been present in Indonesia almost since the very beginning. And ACR has always taken a very strong partnerships-driven approach to the work that we do, meaning that most of our research investments are defined and driven by the development agendas and policy programs of our partner countries. And these partnerships do tend to be very long-term and very collaborative, I suppose. Always driven by a strong sense of place. So I will not embarrass our country network manager by telling you exactly how many years she has been working with us in Indonesia, but she definitely has the longest standing corporate knowledge of any of our current staff. So ACR's role in the innovation system, I suppose, is to broker research partnerships. So to form partnerships between Australian research groups and research groups in host countries to help them collaborate to address significant bottlenecks in their agricultural production systems or their agribusiness market chains that would promote enhanced livelihoods for the rural communities in those countries. In the video that I've posted online, if you've had a chance to have a look at that, we go through some of what we think of as the key ingredients to supporting high impact research through those partnerships. I talk about the importance of strategies and clear directions, and the process that we go through for designing for impact. So I guess a lot of our process is driven by coordination with groups like Prof. Nunung's that will help identify policy agendas or complementary development program initiatives that would benefit from some strong science foundations, or that would benefit from some science accompanying the implementation to really test some of the outcomes that are being observed from some of the implementation. And I guess in terms of that need for science, in the context in which we're working, it's we're asking people to make changes in how they manage their livelihoods, and to be very confident that what we're doing is going to be progressing them towards their life goals and their livelihood objectives, and not exposing them to risk is really a core foundation of how we operate. So I'll leave it there for now, and I really do look forward to having further discussion.
Thank you very much, Bethany, for your introduction. I will open up the floor for questions for our panelists today. Please leave your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. I realize that especially with this group our size, I think next time we will try and make this even more interactive by just giving you access to the microphone. But for now, please leave your message in the Q&A bottom. I've got a question here from Amanda. And Amanda asked, to be able to create impactful research, one of the ways is to promote the application of science-based policy, which this will require scientists to interact heavily with policymakers and governments. However, the Indonesian government, like other nations, is full of political dynamics, especially in the COVID-19 era. Many sudden changes, such as changes in leadership and governance structures, are now rapidly appearing. Amanda is wondering if any of you have experienced a challenge to achieving your goals and incorporating the research into policy under such government dynamics. If so, how do you deal with government, the changing dynamics of government? I guess I will direct this question to Prof. Nunung. Nunung, what are some of your tips, having seen the changes within government from up close? How do you deal with the changing role of government?
Thank you, Amanda. It is a good question and very interesting regarding on particularly in the pandemic situation where there are many changes at the government institution. So my experience is that during the pandemic, we can still also give a very strong recommendation. Just like, for example, in the beginning of pandemic, we were really curious which sector can be survive. In the beginning, if you can track from Google I and my colleague already put an emphasis that agriculture is the important one. So then by different channel, like for example, media and with a good network at the government institution, we directly pass this message by analyzing with one methodology called, like for example, computable general equilibrium. What will happen if some sector changes will have an impact on other sectors. So we have a number, we have a coefficient, but of course, we do not deliver message with the number, with the methodology, but we deliver message with some important keyword. If the pandemic will, like for example, hit all over Indonesia, how many percent economic will go down? What sector can be survived? What should we anticipate for different impact of pandemic? This is a case. And the second, at the national level, we also have a task force for economic recovery due to the COVID-19. So with our network, we inform the Ministry of Economic Coordinator Affairs, things like, and Bappenas as well. So the question again, whether this channel effective, to my knowledge, is effective. Yeah, it's very effective. We even at the government level, there are changes, the policy or changes the person who in charge at the government level, but our message can still be accepted by the government. This is my experience, Amanda. So of course we have to have a strong foundation, not just only research, but we really have to strong foundation with a strong methodology, and we convince the government, look, this is the consequence, this is the impact. So the government has to change. And recently, I also have a research funded by Asia. I will tell you later on because I don't want to dominate this discussion.
Thank you very much, Prof. Nunung. Is there anybody else who would like to respond to that question? Because I think it's a very prominent one. Jana.
Add one point.
Jana, please go ahead.
Yeah,
and, Bethany,
thank you.
We'll go after that.
Excellent question. And I think the political factors are very important in terms of policymaking. In fact, there's a whole literature written on the politics of evidence and how to navigate that. I think from the KSI experience, you mentioned COVID-19. It's actually created a real opportunity in terms of evidence-based policymaking. There's been a real appetite for research because COVID-19 is such a new challenge, and that interdisciplinary research in particular is very welcome, where in the past it wasn't. And so we found that there's been more openness from some policymakers towards receiving research and to turning it around quite quickly because of the urgency of the issues that are being faced. So COVID-19 has actually created some new opportunities for that dynamic that often gets tied up in bureaucratic bottlenecks to move more quickly. And I think what's really important for Indonesia moving forward is how to maintain the collaboration, the interdisciplinary research, that knowledge to policy quick cycle as Indonesia moves into a post-pandemic environment. So although there's many challenges in the COVID-19 environment, obviously it's also created quite a number of opportunities in terms of evidence-based policy.
Thank you, Jana. Bethany,
yeah,
please,
thank you. Just to add from the perspective of a funder and a holder of research knowledge, I suppose, although we're often quite focused on what is new and getting the new research initiatives off the ground and coordinating those with emerging policy opportunities, etc. I think it's also really important to be mindful of existing research and being able to be nimble and adaptive in how you synthesize and communicate existing knowledge in response to emerging priorities, which structurally and institutionally does come with some challenges for researchers in terms of having the time and flexibility, especially in, I'm not sure what the context is in Indonesia, but within a lot of the international networks and the Australian university systems, people's times are increasingly projectized and tied to immediate initiatives. But there's a real value in having that flexible capacity to pull together existing information and package it in order to inform emergent debates. An example top of mind, not from ACR, prior to ACR, I was actually based at the Centre for International Forestry Research, so just next door to IPB there in Bogor. And at the time when the peat fires crisis hit, it just so happened that we had a forestry researcher who had been spending the last 15 years researching the biophysical science of peatlands, which was not terribly attractive work, to be honest. They're smelly, they're messy, they're dirty, they're full of bugs. So it just so happened that he was in a position to be able to understand the dynamics of what was at play in the peatlands in order to be able to bring that together and communicate how to manage peatlands at that moment where the crisis of the fires in those ecosystems took off. So yeah, just a reminder that it's worth looking backwards in order to inform current debates.
Thank you very much, Bethany. I think as a follow-up question on that one, because everybody is sort of referring to Nunung is using the term keywords and policy briefs. I think Jana is saying how the landscape is changing from individual researchers or disciplinary research to multidisciplinary research. And I think my question is really, how do researchers actually then engage with government? Because if the government is changing and the questions is changing, and I have got some really good keywords, or I've got a multidisciplinary program, what are some of the pathways of me as a early career researcher of actually getting my research to the government? Who do I reach out to, and how do I see that through? Yeah, I don't know who's the best position, but please feel free to unmute yourself and provide a view on that.
Who will answer this?
Perhaps Ibu Prima, from a partnership point of view, or from the dialogue point of view that you were talking about with knowledge exchange, would you have a view on how that works? What do I actually do?
Yeah, and basically we do have several strategies for that. And basically, it's also learned from the literature also says that the demand for information from researchers may be disproportionately high when policymakers pay attention to the problem, and disproportionately low when they feel that they have addressed it. So what we are doing in public discourse is that we are highlighting what policy problems that policymakers should pay attention and that they have not addressed it yet. So we call this like, making an opportunity of, opening of the policy window, when you're coupling the, you're highlighting the policy problem, and then you're bringing up your recommendations, policy stream they call it, and matching it with the policy agenda or policymakers' interests, because some of the policymakers have their own agenda, whether they are focusing in this undang-undang, or they have focusing on the other regulations in place, or start focusing on how to increase their bureaucratic reform index. An example that, when you see something, and we are usually our main monitoring in place, where we are seeing the trends of what issues are in the spotlight and how we can bring, for example, PRIs or our partners' research to answer this problem. And that's how we also bring in our partner media, for example, Kompas, Jakarta Post, or Tempo, to help highlight the policy problem and how this has been answered, or where research is currently conducted, for example, by our knowledge producer or our partners. And that's, as I said earlier, that in our public discourse, we bring together the elements of knowledge ecosystem where policy knowledge users meet with knowledge producers, and there is a role of knowledge intermediary media help in communicating research and also generate public awareness of it. I think that's from our experience in the program implementations.
So would you advise early career researchers to closely work with your partners, KSI's partners, as you say, the knowledge producers, or can they even work directly with you?
Well, yeah, early career researchers can also approach us, but most of our work is basically, as I mentioned, we take up trends on what are emerging issues and how we bring existing knowledge to answer that problem. Because if we need to wait until the knowledge is produced, well, there's an issues. And that would be too late because the government always wanted to, or they have an appetite on how to keep it concise, and they want an answer right away. They basically want us to meet a tight brief, and it has to be efficient or data efficient, present the data or gather data efficiently, and that's why for example, in one of our public discourse, we also highlight on the problems on as a COVID-19 pandemic issues where government want to have an accelerated policy making process, rather than cutting up the policy cycle, right? So they want to have an accelerated one, and that means we also need to highlight the role of how to gather data efficiently, what's the role of the digital government in this, and how it can help the government to be more evidence-informed policy making, if it is not yet the results provided for or research finding provided exactly for that current problem. I think that's the learning from our sites there, where when we also encourage the early career researchers to work together with our partner, the Australia-Indonesia, because they help to communicate the scientific findings into more popular articles, and that helps a lot. We also can, spread it with the media, and basically the advice is always, how we can tailor it, keep it concise, tailor it to your audience, whether your audience is policymakers or your audience are the public via media, and make evidence really policy relevant. And that's the focus of our work in communicating research together with partners.
Thank you very much, Ibu Prima. It's very nice to hear you speak about the importance of communication and brief communication and very to-the-point communication there as well. We've done with the people in the Talent Accelerator program, particularly those within the Partnership for Australia-Indonesia Research. We've done some work with the conversation on writing articles, and some have already been published in that. So it's nice to hear that from your side as well as an important initiative. I've got another question here from the people in the audience. I've got a question from Ratna that kind of follows on from the question that we are addressing here. And Ratna asks, what is a better roadmap for early career researchers? Getting access to policymakers first and ask them on issues that need research efforts, or growing our competence and specialization until somebody among the policymakers will notice what we are doing? So would you advise reaching out early in your career, or so proactively reaching out to policymakers, or to build a body of knowledge first and then waiting to be noticed? What are some of your experiences, Prof. Nunung?
Okay, thank you. This question remembering me when I was a junior staff and junior lecturer at IBB University. One of keyword is stock of knowledge. Stock of knowledge is very important. How we can enrich our stock of knowledge by having many experiences of doing research. So for a junior or early career researcher, I would suggest that you can attach your research activities either with a research center in your university or in other a government institution, or you can engage by having a joint publication with your senior. Then you focus on what you will be. Like for example, my background is agriculture economic and development economic. So I focus on that issues. And then if you also have a chance, you can have a periodically published in a journal or in a popular media, or you can also give with your students, like for example, discussion, intensively discussion, and then publish your discussion into different platform. Right now, it's very easy to share your idea, to share your thought. Even if you have your own blog, you can also share what your experience doing a research, what is the important research result based on your own research. This is also different channel that you can then enrich stock of your knowledge. Yeah, this is my response, Martin.
Thank you, Professor Nanong. Bethany, I'm wondering from the ACR's point of view, what do you see early career researchers do, or what would you encourage early career researchers to do in that matter?
Yeah, sure. I guess from our point of view, when we think about what it takes to achieve impact from research, I almost feel as though individual researchers or individual research projects is almost the wrong unit of analysis to be asking how you achieve that. I think a lot of the presentation that I prepared and have shared earlier speaks about the ecosystem that needs to be in place to support research being brokered into knowledge and influence. And a lot of that is about long-term partnerships and appropriate strategies and those sorts of things. So essentially, I think I would agree with Prof. Nanong that it's, as an early career researcher, it's good to look for opportunities to be part of teams that provide that ecosystem whilst strengthening your technical foundational research skills, increasing your credibility within your research profession. And I guess being strategic about who you partner with and how you enter into programs that will provide the support to get that experience into how to engage with policy and practice change processes. I also just wanted to briefly touch on that question about multidisciplinary research, if I could. I think from our point of view, they are people who are able to coordinate and manage multiple disciplinary research programs. The gold standard. They're exactly what we're looking for. It makes for such much more effective integrated research programs if you have someone who can create the space for that real dialogue between disciplines and that transdisciplinary knowledge translation for users. So if I would say that it is at times frustrating and it can be quite time consuming. So for an early career researcher, you'll find that you often have misunderstandings and miscommunications, and there's a lot of explaining worldviews to happen between different research schools. So it's slower and it's more time consuming, but ultimately that is the future of research for development initiatives from our point of view. So it will be slower and it will be frustrating, but I think ultimately it's a really strong, important career pathway to pursue.
Thank you for elaborating on that, Bethany. I think it's an important insight to realize that it is slower and it is more difficult, as you say, and sometimes more frustrating to do that kind of research. But I assume that, as you say, like institutions like ACR, with that our governments and also our universities will latch onto that idea. And I think that they will change our performance evaluation criteria, for example, accordingly. And ACR, for example, will realize that it takes a bit more time to put a multidisciplinary team together. But as you say, the solutions there will be very rich. So thank you for bringing that to the foreground. I have another question here from Dani. Many researchers actually have relevant implications for development and research. However, to make the most of the impact from that research, it often comes down to many other aspects: the timing, the scale of the research, who it is targeted to, the institutions that you're working with. So how do you incorporate all those different aspects, and how do you transfer those efforts to be maximize the impact from research? So I think in my view, this is kind of a question around what is the role of the researcher in driving that impact, and how do you collaborate with others in dealing with some of those other complexities? Jana, would you have an insight on that?
Sure, and I think this is somewhat related to the previous question. One tip that we provided in our video for early career researchers is to understand the policy process in whatever environment you're working in, whether it's the Australian environment or the Indonesian environment. It's not something you might be trained to do necessarily because you're trained with your academic background, but to be really impactful in terms of your research, it's important to understand how the policy process works, when the key moments are. You know, if you're trying to influence draft legislation, if you're trying to influence monitoring and evaluation strategy, if you're trying to influence a distance learning program or something like that, you need to know what stage it's at and what part of the work that you're doing is relevant. And that means building relationships with potential government officials in different departments or different agencies, and also being aware of the different issues that they're working on and when they're working on. Because if you are the expert in your research area, then you know when certain issues are going to be discussed, you can target your research findings at just the right moment with just the right person, and that's where the impact will happen. So it requires a little bit more homework on the side of the researcher, but if that becomes something that you're become good at doing, I think you'll be much more satisfied in terms of the research being taken up. And Prima made a good point earlier in terms of also the timing aspects of that. So I think that's something that's often overlooked because you're working so hard just to get the research findings out. But if you wait too long, then by the time the research is done, then you want to make your presentation, but the government officials have moved on to the next thing. So, you know, sometimes it means pulling some of the findings, perhaps pre-publication. There's lots of different techniques to make sure that that data gets into the hands of the people who need it when they need it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jana. That's very nice to emphasize that. It aligns with what Professor Michael Mintram was talking about in our last webinar around policy entrepreneurialism, and really looking for where the opportunity is and what are some of the ways of grabbing that opportunity. Absolutely. Is there anybody else who would like to respond to that question? How can you incorporate all those different aspects, things that are required to get from policy to from research to policy? Apologies. Great. I'm going to leave that question there. I've got a following question that has come in, and please keep submitting your questions to the Q&A. Please, if the question is for anyone in specific, please mention their name at the start of your question, and I can direct the question accordingly. I've got a question for Bethany. Let me just read that very quickly. So often research is characterized by a process of collaboration between scientists and non-scientists on a specific challenge, on a specific real problem. How do you measure the scientific and the societal impact from research, so that we know that we have got both those stakeholders within the research? And how does ACR deal with that challenge? So what is the best approach to measure successful collaboration of scientists and non-scientists, and to avoid conflict between these two separate entities with different goals?
Thank you. That's a very big question. I could probably speak on it for weeks, but I guess the core of it for us and how we approach thinking about measuring research impact comes back to a clarity about what a project was trying to achieve and how it was trying to achieve it. So making sure that when you come to selecting a methodology to measure the intended impacts, you're measuring the most appropriate, meaningful elements of the effort. So and acknowledging that there are mutual drivers, I guess. We have in partnership people who are often early stage career researchers who are pursuing an academic career, and we also have them working in partnership with farmers in their fields who have very immediate livelihood demands and imperatives. I guess what I would say is that we try to value both values. So within a life of a project, you need to be quite clear about what is going to be achievable and measurable within that project, and ensure that you're not trying to assess something that's unachievable within the unit of research analysis, but also values the contribution that people have made. I'm just trying to think of an example where there has been an issue of conflict between those two groups. I think, again, to go, most evaluators will say this, a lot of the thinking about evaluation happens in design, and because ACR has quite a long iterative design process, a lot of those potential complications are really thought through and dealt with in a sort of do no harm sort of review phase in our design process. So by the time we come to evaluation, most of those issues have been ironed out in the system, I suppose. But the question of measuring and attributing results back to research is really quite difficult for all of the reasons that we've spoken about. When you think about a conventional outcomes hierarchy, research is a very foundational input into a complex policymaking process or a complex practice ecosystem where you're competing with multiple, sometimes aligned, sometimes different interests and knowledge inputs. So I think you do need to be quite careful about how you design and plan for assessing and attributing impact to individual research projects, both in terms of science outcomes and your community policy, your community livelihood level impacts. I feel like if I start going down specifics, I could talk all day, but it's a good question and a really interesting area to be mindful of in how you're designing your impact evaluations, I suppose, and wanting to be sure that your focus on trying to achieve one thing is not happening at the expense of things that are really important to communities.
Bethany, can I ask a follow-up question on that? You mentioned that a lot of those differences are being sorted out in the design phase of the research, and that there is an iterative approach to developing that research in collaboration between the academics and the people who are involved in the research that are non-academics. And you mentioned iterative process. What do you see as the role of ACR or an institute like a center or institute like ACR in facilitating that iterative process? How do you, what's your role in that?
Yeah, I mean, ACR always communicates itself as a partnership broker. So it's introducing people that have the appropriate skills to work with communities in place. So a lot of our review processes focus on making sure that the teams that we're inviting to be part of the design and development and implementation of research are appropriately skilled. There's an appropriate balance of expertise, I suppose. The classic conundrum for ACR is that we are a biophysical research centre. So often our traditional research pool within Australia have strong biophysical research skills, crop breeding and animal health, so animal feed scientists, those kinds of people that have not always spent a lot of time thinking about the people's social dynamics, knowledge, translation, social learning, a whole lot of those areas that are really crucial in that transition between hard science, knowledge translation, adoption and use. So really one of the most common feedback that we give to project teams when they put forward their suggestions for who should be on a team is that that's a really strong biophysical team. You'll solve some excellent biophysical problems. What you need to do is start thinking about, are these the right problems for the communities? Are they equipped to be responding to those sorts of information? How is it that they absorb knowledge? Who are their trusted networks and how do they receive, process and what are their relationships of trust, I guess. So a lot of that stuff is very social sciences, the heartland of social science. So brokering those relationships in that multidisciplinary team to be sure that the knowledge that produced is appropriate and accessible and credible to the audience that it's supposed to be influencing at the community level.
So one of the most important roles of ACR, or as you say, in the brokering, is making sure that the right people are around the table, that they are talking about the right topics that are fitted for that situation, and that they together achieve a good result, or a research design, for example. Great, thank you very much. That's thank you for explaining that a bit further. So I've got another question here from Rafika. And Rafika says, from my personal experience, I've worked with local government. And even after we helped the local government working on their policy draft, it took a very long time for that policy draft to be implemented. Because they said the laws and regulation from the central government kept changing, and therefore they hardly followed, or in the end ended up implementing the research into policy. Do you have any suggestions on how to deal with sort of the long timelines within policy, and to make sure that how do you engage with that as a researcher? And Professor Nunung, what would be your view on that?
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting question as well. That actually, as a researcher, we have a passion. Sometimes we come up with a very good result, and we have to deliver this research to the government. But unfortunately, then our research advice is not be considered very soon with the government because of a lack of the decision making. My suggestion, based on our experience again, please keep patient. And then secondly, maybe we can choose different channel to deliver our important message regarding on the policy. If we cannot, of course, we can still choose, like for example, intensive discussion with our network, because once you provide an important result regarding on the policy, then you can attract many people to discuss this important issue. If this become like a public concern, I believe government will consider it. But again, this should be based on our research. So I also will respond to other question regarding on the different timeline. Sometimes we face that government really need to deliver a policy very soon. So how, as a researcher, we consider this? We have what we call it rapid assessment. So you can imagine within just 2 weeks, like for example, based on again our experience in Presidential Advisory Council office, just only 2 weeks we have to come up with the important recommendation. What should we do? Of course, a week we discuss intensively with different stakeholders. Then we also analyze intensively with the different data. As I again mentioned, stock of knowledge is very important to synthesize, and working with a different scientists is also important, because then we can get a different point of view related to the important issue. Yeah, different stakeholder, different scientists from different background. And yeah, this is for rapid assessment research. But then if it take longer, of course, we can harvest from different data. So that's why I really support knowledge initiative to produce one data policy. It is very important. If the, in Indonesian case, sometimes which data should we reverse? To my knowledge, we have to refer from Central Bureau of Statistics, or PPS. This is data that we recognize, and we can use this data, and we can we can have a good analysis from BPS data. This is my response, Martin.
Thank you, Prof. Nunung. I have a follow-up question from that. You mentioned that to deal with these different timelines, we can use different teams, as you say, multidisciplinary approach, so we can spread the burden a little bit across our colleagues to keep sure that we're engaged over a longer period of time, that we strengthen our research through collecting data as we work with the government so that we can give them a better proposal. You also say that there is different to approach the government through different channels. I'm wondering, because there are the formal channels that the government works with, and the formal channels of communicating with researchers. And I want to ask you to elaborate a bit more on those. But there are also, as you mentioned, the informal channels of communicating, and especially in those short-term timeframes, those might become very important. Can you talk a little bit more about the formal and informal pathways? And I think this is a question for everybody. I would also be very interested to hear Jana's perspective on this as well, for example. So Prof. Nunung, could you talk a bit more about the formal and informal channels to work with the government?
Yeah, thank you. First, we can translate and share our research into formal channel. Let's say we can have a seminar. Seminar is part of it, a formal channel to attract the government to listen our research result. Deliver this result into seminar. Deliver this research into a formal event. This one channel that we can usually use to inform the policymakers. Secondly, an informal channel. I believe that all of us have a good network in the government institution. So we can discuss with a key person in a particular minister or government institution. By giving a book or by giving a policy brief, or even just while we have a cup of coffee, we discuss. Look, we concern on this particular issue. We already have an important research result based on our intensive research. Yeah, this is what I mean by informal channel. So this is quite often I also use to deliver important message to the government. But of course, formal event is important one. Yeah. And secondly, I also would like to give an experience, because the parliament member is also important influence the policy. As I part of the member at the central bank supervision agency, we also active communicate with parliament. Yeah, we also active with central bank. We also active with different stakeholders. Yeah, again, this is part of rapid assessment. Taking a case, the economic downturn regarding on the COVID-19. So we have to have a quick response to analyze, but then how to deliver this our assessment, we communicate with the parliament. Then we communicate with the government as well. So different channels should be used if we really want to contribute the important research to be translated into policy makers. This my response.
Just a very quick follow-up question. Do you notice that one or the other is more effective along the formal or the informal pathway?
Yeah, this is depend on the issue. Yeah, depend on the issue. Sometimes informal communication is also can be important one. Yeah, can be important one. Just given an example, if I have a time. Yeah,
yes,
we have a research with ASEAN, funded by ASEAN on rural transformation. So we come up with a very important research result regarding on the factor influence rural transformation in Indonesia, because I have a good contact with someone in the ministry. Then I communicate this research. Oh no, this is very important. Then I will immediately inform to the high level of the meeting. Yeah, this is a channel that we can use. Even we also have a formal event, like for example, webinar. Yeah, webinar we inform to the different stakeholders. But again, depend on the issue. Yeah, depend on the issue, Martijn.
Thank you very much, Nunung. Jana, please come in.
Yes, I appreciate the question from Rafika and also about the issues between central government and local government. Having worked on local governance programming for a long time, that's always a challenge in terms of the changing laws and regulations and the contradictions of laws and regulations, particularly in Indonesia. You know, the Knowledge Sector Initiative, just to give you an example, also has worked in South Sulawesi and supported a team of researchers to support the provincial government on a value chain commodity analysis of the silk industry as part of the COVID-19 response there. And throughout the life of the research, the head of the Bapalitbangga changed, I think it was 3 times. The governor changed twice, and just in this the phase of that particular research. So you had agreement on the design, you had agreement on the objectives, and then there's a change. And so you revisit it again, and you talk about it again with the new administration, and then you talk it about again. And then when it comes to the policy uptake, you're talking about it again. So it's a iterative, I think someone mentioned that word earlier, process, and it means continually managing the network and communicating as the research is being conducted, as well as when it's finished, I think in terms of achieving that policy impact. So I think whether it's central government, local government dynamics, or the dynamics within a particular department or agency, it means continually assessing that changing environment and adjusting the research and the research communication accordingly. And I couldn't agree more with what Professor Nunung mentioned earlier about balancing informal and formal communication. Certainly in our experience, the informal is very powerful.
Thank you, Jana. I've got another question here. I just want to check with Anis. I think Anis's question is also about timelines, and I think we have discussed Anis's question. Anis, please, if you feel that your question has not been addressed, please send another reply in the Q&A box, but I think this was what we were just discussing before. Then there's another question from Amanda, who is asking, as mentioned, understanding the governance system and how it works is important for early career researchers in order to create impactful research. Her question relates to the experience of all panelists who have been working closely with Indonesian stakeholders, from regional to national level for many years. Amanda's wondering, do you have experience in engaging stakeholders, especially from the government institutions that are often little motivated to actively participate due to the sense of belonging to one particular issue or topic? I think especially if we're talking about multidisciplinary research, government is very specialized. So from Amanda's observation, this is one of the many reasons for some governments, governmental parties to collaborate or at least share information with other stakeholders that has considered or little relation to the addressed issue or topic of the project. Do you recognize this challenge, and what are your strategies of getting government departments to collaborate with each other and sharing data with researchers? Is there anyone who feels particularly in a good place to answer this question?
Yeah, Pinkan, I was wondering if you wanted to share an example from
Yeah.
Kristen, perhaps.
Okay, maybe not on that too sensitive of an issue, but I can share an example of our think tanks who has to work to solve a particular policy issues. They have to work with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Religion Affairs. Both have to work together to develop curriculum, renew the curriculum, especially if it's a religion education curriculum. It is pretty hard actually for both of them to really meet in agreement. So our think tank at that time one is what Prof. Nunung was saying, it's about passion. Yeah. So you don't give up when your data is not, where your information is not well accepted, but you also take any small wins you can get and build rapport and reputations there. So first of all, maybe they don't accept your recommendation and they don't want to engage, but then you go through another channel and you use the systems, like bringing another agencies and the system within the curriculum development, for example, including another body in the government like the BSNP, the national standard body. So that's actually bringing another stakeholder into this already complicated games. But that additional network actually open up more discussions and allowing your recommendations to start to get in. And so engagement starts to be built. And don't be afraid in restructuring your recommendations. So it doesn't just, your way of thinking is being put forward to them, but also acknowledging their way of thinking, and so they can see the benefit of actually engaging with your work in order to enrich what they already feel, the sense of belonging. So that's what worked with one of our think tanks in bringing not only two, but actually three stakeholders working together on an issue where everyone has a sense of their own belonging. So thank you.
I might just add to that as well, that in our experience, kind of use the word sense of belonging, and you use that term in your question as well. But often we've found that it's a lot about incentives and disincentives, so that there might be a risk to government officials to sharing data. Might be a risk of losing budget, of losing control over a program, and that it's very important to understand the political economy of the stakeholders that you're dealing with, to understand what's motivating them. And maybe they care about it, but they have internal pressures because of the system they're under to share or not share data, or to collaborate or not to collaborate. So that's helpful also in analyzing where the opportunities are and where the constraints are in terms of how to try to influence the process. Thanks.
Can I add some sentence, Martin? Yeah.
Yes, please.
First, we have to consider regarding on research ecosystem in Indonesia. I think Pitani just also mentioning earlier about research ecosystem. This is very important. As a early career researcher, I also would suggest that now we are changing in paradigm. Yeah, we are changing in paradigm, meaning that if we think research ecosystem, we think as a system. So we cannot just focus now on a particular topic, but then one will influence the other. So that's why it is very important for all of you to share the idea how important we think as a system. Yeah, because again, based on our experience, this is also time to work together with other institution, university, think tank, government. Yeah, even government also sometimes have their own research institution. But now again, we actively collaborate with research institution in a different government institution. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Nunung. I just want to ask a follow-up question for Ibu Pinkan. At the very start in the introduction, you mentioned that you work with think tanks to determine what is good quality research, and you also mentioned the word useful. What is useful research? And you also then mentioned that you think a lot about the monitoring and evaluation of that research. I think the two are very connected, right? The design of the research and then the monitoring and evaluation. What are some of the things that you look for? What would you consider to be high quality or useful research, Ibu Pinkan?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. So a typical good research is being judge upon the rigorousness of the methodology. Yeah? But in terms of policy research, we need to look a bit further as how it's actually relevant, timely, and useful for a particular policy issues. So that's when we encourage our think tanks to, in addition to ensuring that the research methodology are rigorous, we want to see the legitimacy of their research and the uptake of their research. So we recommend them to engage policymakers and any relevant stakeholders that can support the influence of their recommendation as early as possible, starting even from the design stage to when you deliver your preliminary result until the end of your research process. And along the way, you check whether the stakeholders and the government, the policymakers, found the research as useful, relevant, and timely. So we check that every quarter, actually. We ask them, did you find any comments about the usefulness, relevance, and timeliness of your research? And when they found any gaps in it, they realize, oh, they need to possibly do more efforts in engaging the policymakers, bringing more stakeholders in to get into the policymakers. Yeah, so it's a process there, including getting the uptake. Yeah, so you put forward your research recommendation and see how many people, even beyond the policymakers, how many people are actually looking at your research, how many are actually posing more questions about it. So sometimes you may miss the particular policy time, but you still get an uptake elsewhere, and hopefully that can bring that issues again when the time is right. Yeah, so we try to fill the hole, in every holes basically. So that's how we look at the quality of the policy research. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a fantastic explanation, Ibu Pinkan. I was wondering if Bethany, from an ACR's point of view, do you look at impact in the evaluation of impact in a similar way, or do you have different ways of engaging with impact and what makes research useful?
Yeah, thank you. No, I was nodding along with you, Bupakana. We have a very similar approach, and I think a lot of those features of what makes for credible, legitimate research is really important. I know, so as part of ACR's work, we support the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, who have put some work into developing what we'd call transdisciplinary research quality frameworks. So really distilling some of those lessons down into what are some of the features that make quality research at the design stage that you can then follow through to see what the correlation was between those features in design and those features in the outcomes and impacts. I guess in terms of measuring the impact of research, there's two main ways that we do it. One is around a very theory-based evaluation, so looking at what was a project's theory of change, how did they expect, what was how did they expect their research process and activities to result in change in that particular context, and going through, it's largely a qualitative process of saturation sampling around people involved in a change process, really, to see who can substantiate whether that narrative of change was in fact correct. So that's a very sort of hypothesis testing approach, I suppose. This is how we thought it was going to work. Did it work that way? What evidence can we bring to bear on that sort of theory of change? And that really helps us substantiate, especially those early relationships between the research and the change in knowledge, attitudes, and awareness, because it's that's sort of the closest we have to our sphere of control. You know, we can engage with people in those sort of first layers of a policy-making process or a practice change process, and inform them and equip them with information that they can take into that next stage of sort of political negotiation. So in terms of how we would judge a successful policy engagement process, I think making sure that they have a clear strategy for doing that, and they have done that and equipped policymakers to go into their debates with quality evidence is sort of the bar that you can say we're responsible for, and then looking at what policies were in fact implemented that were informed by that information, and what were the eventual flow-on effects in terms of livelihoods or land restoration or carbon emissions avoided, those sorts of things. Is sort of the next layer of complication. So it becomes much more abstract at that level, and you are much more, I guess, relying on modelling and those sorts of methods to extrapolate some kind of proportional influence on broader population scale changes. So there's, you can get very technical and very econometric at that sort of level, but I think it's really important to invest in that first, understanding that first relationship between the research and the people who are making the decisions to change their practice on the basis of it.
Thank you, Bethany. There's a follow-up question from Anis. Thank you, Anis, for rephrasing the question and in line with the current discussion. And yeah, thank you, and nice to see you here in the session again, Anis. So a question for KSI and whoever is in the best position to respond to this question: how can we discover about the long-term outcomes of our research and whether they will still be relevant, especially because of the data that keeps changing and various sources of data that we use? So how can we make sure that our research is relevant in the long term?
Maybe I can try to answer that. So in many of our cases with the policy research, the think tanks that we work with, they already have a bunch of knowledge with them. But for every recent policy issues, they somehow try to renew the data even a bit. Yeah, that's also to ensure the relevance of their past research with the very current issues. They can do very quick survey, or they can adapt their research, do a very quick data collection, or work with the Balitbank, for example, and be part of the mini research of a bigger research of the Balitbank. And so they try to ensure the outcome of their previous research, but still try to build a newer version of it to ensure it's relevant with the changing environment that may happen through during the time.
I would just add to that. Oh, silakan, Prof.
Sorry.
Yeah, silakan.
Okay.
Prof. Nunung, please.
Just quick response. I refer to different Nobel laureate. The first article sometime published 20 or 30 years before they awarded as a Nobel laureate in economics. So meaning that whatever research is still relevant, because as Bu Pinkan was mentioning that there are some environmental changing, but the basic knowledge, the pillar is still relevant. So we cannot neglect the previous research result, but then we just we can update with a new data, with our new observation. What are the changing, and then what should we put into new perspective regarding on the different environment? Yeah, this is my point, Martin.
Thank you very much, Prof. Nunung.
I would just add to that Pinkan's explanation earlier, and also what Prof. Nunung was saying, that the importance of knowledge management is really important here in terms of making sure that whether you're doing it as an individual researcher or you're attached to a research center, research institute, that you're making sure that the body of knowledge that you've produced is stored and accessible to the public. We had an example of a policy research institute that KSI supported that did work on village governance for almost 10 years. And it wasn't until there was a change in a major law in Indonesia that it became relevant. And suddenly they were in the spotlight because they had this body of knowledge and were in the perfect position to be able to speak to it. You know, and that's also related to the earlier question about, should I spend my time developing the body of knowledge or spend my time on other things? I mean, I think you have to do multiple different ways of building your profile as well as your influence in the policy networks, but definitely make sure that your good work is stored and accessible to the public. and open access as much as you can in terms of publishing, so that people can get to it, because something that may not be relevant now may be relevant, as Prof. Nunum pointed out, in the future. And we've certainly seen that with a number of policy research institutes that we've supported.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking at the clock and notice it's 3 minutes to the end of our session. Eugene Sebastian from the Australia-Indonesia Centre had one question that I think we'll take into the next session, Eugene, around what are some of the skills early career researchers should prioritize on to become effective change advocates. And I propose that we take this question into our next session, where we talk to academics who have been working and in the field and trying to achieve impact, and see what skills that they have developed and what they would recommend other people developing as well. For now, I would like to thank foremost our panel for making time today and providing us very generously with the resources and the videos that you have developed. And thank you for sharing your rich insight and your experience with us. It is valuable to see. From what I've learned from today is that as an early career researcher, it's foremost important to get an overview of the landscape that you are working in. What is that ecosystem that is relevant to your topic and your research, to then carefully select the parties that you will work with, because one of the questions was there is so much complexity into this and so many different tasks and communicating with different people. I think a relevant question is, who do you team up with? So being selective and strategic about who you work with becomes very important. Then to understand the timelines of political cycles and the need for research. So there is a certain perishable date, perhaps for certain questions, or something that needs addressed very quickly, or that has a longer time frame to work on. So knowing that in setting our ambitions for research, and I think the last two things that I take away is that then research design becomes very important in designing for impact, making sure that you can collaborate with those different parties and that the research is relevant for and useful for the parties that you work with. And the very last point is to be patient. And this has come up a couple of times, but policy change from research takes a bit of time and a lot of effort. So being patient is a very good skill to develop for researchers and a quality to have. Again, thank you very much as well to all the participants here with us today and your excellent questions. I hope you find this session helpful and useful in developing your working relationships and your research to become more impactful. I'm very much looking forward to discussing the next topic. How do researchers plan for impact? So we'll hear from the researchers' point of view, what they have done, what skills they have developed, how they have grown their careers while being impactful in multiple dimensions. This webinar will be on the 27th of July. The same time, we'll go for another hour and a half. My last question to you is to please fill out our survey. That immediately as we end the session, the survey will pop up. We are very keen to take your feedback into account. As I said, we are a developing program and we grow hopefully every session. My aim is to keep growing. So please, if you have any feedback to us and how we can be more relevant and useful to you, please let us know. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thank you again, everybody, and have an excellent day.